if we're all going to die and death is inevitable, what's the point of it all? Now, I'm sure this is the question that kind of plagued many people thousands of years ago when they began to see how futile, resistance was to death. That, it was inevitable, we were going to die, and that all our toilings and everything that we strive for, in the end, we all succumb to death. And so it probably didn't set well with people in ancient times any more than it sets well with us. I mean, we're obviously somewhat more enlightened, I would say, that we understand that, that it's a part of life, and it's the life cycle. That, we're born, we live for a period of time, and then we die, and then we no longer exist. But I think that was hard then, back in the day, and hard now for some people to sort of cope with and sort of process that. Well, geez, which it really shouldn't be, because if you didn't exist before, and then, now you do, why would you think that, what I'm saying? It's not hard to fathom and get your head wrapped around it, that it's hard to accept, but I'm just saying it makes sense that at one point you didn't exist before conception. So anyways, that's not really the point of the video. I wanted to kind of start with that to show that I'm sure this is the type of thinking that, many philosophers, many people in the time, back in the day, were thinking about, and many Christians were thinking, how to sort of sidestep this issue, how to sort of help people cope with dying and death and looking at things. And so one of the ways that Christianity does that is telling people that, well, when you die, don't worry, you're going to a better place, and you're going to see your loved ones again there. And so it's very comforting, and it's less disarming, or it is disarming, and that you sense that you feel like everything's going to be okay. And when I transcend, or when I go from this life to the great beyond, it's going to be peaceful. Everything's going to be fun. Again, you see, there's an intent to comfort people in the Christian message. So, am I saying that that's the only reason why Christianity was invented? No, I'm not saying that. There are a plethora of other reasons why. But I think this is one of the reasons why Christianity was sold, and also was so sellable. If that's a word. It was so marketable, I guess, because it was a fact of life that ancient people had to contend with, just as much as it is a fact of life that we now, in our present day, have to contend with. So, I mean, what better way than to say that, when you die and when your life comes to an end in this life, that you're going to go on to an afterlife. I mean, it's not like throughout history that Christianity had exclusive rights to the afterlife concept. I mean, there were obviously the Egyptians who had belief, and many others in ancient times that believed in an afterlife as a sort of way to, like with the Egyptians, they did the mummification and the burying people with their riches and that sort of thing, and so that concept, I think, that idea of hey, preparing for the afterlife and getting ready for getting ready to be for your soul to be judged, and it's not something that's unique to Christianity, but I think it is something that Christianity grabbed a hold of and found a way that hey, we can comfort our people, because I think that if it hadn't have addressed those concerns, if it hadn't placed in its belief system ways of comforting the dying, the sick, the people that were soon going to be the recently departed, it would kind of be amiss. It would be something that's certainly needed there, and so it just makes sense that it would naturally have been addressed in its religion. So you can see why it's super helpful to have that in your belief system, that that there's a concept of an afterlife, because it's something that has plagued us from the beginning of time, and still plagues us. Now again, not everyone requires or needs to have the idea. Some people are like, I don't care, when I die and I become worm food and that's the end, hey, whatever. But you can see that there are many, if we're honest with ourselves, there are many, myself included, we all kind of fear, as humanity, as mankind has always done from the beginning of time. We've always feared death. We've not understood. We couldn't make sense of one minute they're here and the next minute you're not. And so it's like, so I think that, again, not that Christianity, the intent was to this was the sole purpose of its creation. No, but I think that it would certainly be helpful to address, which I think Christianity tries to do, though sometimes maybe not so often eloquently or as great as maybe they should. I think it tries to address concerns that people have, and that would have come up, that people today have, and people in ancient times would have had. And so the fact that it does, I again don't think it makes it true or means that we've got something here to really worth considering. No, I think that there have been many other civilizations, many other cultures that have tried to address the burning question of the day, which will always be: is there an afterlife? Is there not an afterlife? And so, simply because it can address that, or tries or makes attempts to address it, doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that that's something that they acknowledged, the early Christians, acknowledged and said, okay, we need to do something about this. We need to address it. We need to show, that God has a plan, and that Jesus is coming to, relieve the sting of death, or something to that effect is what it said in the New Testament. So, anyhow, that's really what I wanted to communicate in this video. Just that I think that was the question. What is the meaning of life? Is there an afterlife? How do we cope with death? All those kind of things, I'm sure, are very philosophical, and even probably common people, lay people, were thinking this. And so, of course, Christianity needed to embrace this question as well, and make sure that they fully addressed it and made it so that people could say, oh, okay, within Christianity, we've got a path to the afterlife, and that we don't have to fear death. So I don't think that was the intent of what but I think it was certainly something that they needed to make sure that they covered all their bases, so to speak, and could address people's concerns and fears that they might have of what happens when we die. And so because it does that, because it gives people peace of mind, I think it's extremely helpful in that way. Whether or not there's really any truth to being judged, and that there's a God, and that anything in there is truth beyond just being myth and legends, well, that's debatable. But I think at a minimum, at least, it does try to address, and give people some hope and some sense of an afterlife. Whether that's true or not, it's irrelevant. But I'm just saying, people needed that to be addressed in ancient times, as they still do today. And so I think that Christianity does try to do that. So, all right, thanks for watching the video. We'll see you next time.